And a good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Surely you've seen me enough times. We need a little more energy than that. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, that's so much better. Don't you feel better when that happens? Of course, you feel more excited. If I haven't gotten a chance to meet you, my name is Michael Wydell. I am the 2024 host of APOLOGIA. So excited to be here for tonight's program. Clearly you're here because you know who our special guest is. It's Seth Dillon, the CEO of Babylon Bee, which is incredible. I can't wait for the discussion tonight. So for Apologia, if this is your first time, I love to ask this every time. Who here is this your first time ever attending an Apologia event? Oh, I love that there's, cool, very cool, welcome. Awesome, I love seeing the hands. It's really cool to have you here. Here's how the program works. It's a couple of hours. For the first hour, it will be almost like a fireside chat between Pastor Alec and Seth Dillon. And during that time, you have the opportunity to ask questions. You'll text in your questions. So if we can put that number up on the screen, just text your questions to 844-773-0530. What will happen is at the top of the next hour, we'll take a quick 10, 15-minute break. We'll collect all of those questions. And then the second hour is driven by the questions that you want to hear answered by Seth Dillon and Pastor Alex. So again, we want to make this really interactive and to serve the purposes ultimately of educating you on, for tonight, what's going on around free speech and communication and the press and all of those types of things. So I think it should be a really interesting conversation. You've probably already been to the lobby. You saw our 3 faithful booths that you've stopped by before. Of course, we have the Concerned Citizens for Education. I love what they do. If you've never heard of them before, essentially what they do is ensure that the voice of the church, the voice of concerned parents, the voice of concerned conservatives are represented in the public school board meetings. They only ask for your support by attending with them. They're a group of 10 people that attend school board meetings. They speak up on your behalf, and all they're asking is for more people to join them. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to even raise your hand or anything like that. They're just strength in numbers, and they're looking for that support. So I think that's an awesome cause that it's really easy for any of us to get around. Next is Family Policy Institute of Washington. With all of the crazy laws and regulations that are being passed, most recently, I'm sure you've seen about being able to narc on your neighbor if they're saying hate speech and that person gets rewarded with a $2,000 bounty. That's not a Babylon Bee headline. That's real life, which is kind of crazy. The FPIW will help you understand what is going on in Olympia and what you can do about it. What are the bills that are being passed that need your votes? And then lastly, TPUSA, Turning Point USA, the UW campus is always here. Go Dogs. They have a guest speaker coming up in a couple of weeks, so make sure to stop by there. You know, I'm always thinking every time, like, how do I entertain this audience to warm you guys up? And you do such a great job making me feel really comfortable up here. But I love the Babylon Bee. And in fact, the Babylon Bee has a sister site called Not the Bee, notthebee.com. And one of the things that they do is they provide a daily newsletter that gives you their kind of perspective on the news. That's actually how I understand what's going on in the world. I read Wall Street Journal and I read Not the Bee. So that's not a joke, that's like really serious. So if you're wanting to know what's going on in the world, you should go to notthebee.com. Make sure to follow the Babylon Bee on social media. That's the biggest way we can give them support and allow them to continue to be kind of that voice of truth through comedy, which I think is really an important cause for us all. But I love the Babylon Bee, and I've wanted to try my hand at creative writing. So get ready, ladies and gentlemen. I tried 3 Babylon Bee Ask Satire headlines about this crazy role that I have in this program. So headline 1, Babylon Bee Ask, man takes on evening show duty to escape's wife's honey-do list, no commercial breaks in sight. This, as my brother-in-law just said, this is my honey-do list. I don't have a choice. Headline 2. Husband takes over evening show to prove to his wife he can do something other than forget anniversaries and birthdays. And headline 3, Man convinced hosting evening program will finally make wife appreciate his dad jokes. Can you tell I'm not a paid professional? I'm just trying to entertain you guys. Okay, with that, enough of me. Tonight's guest, Seth Dillon, is the CEO of the Babylon Bee, the world's most trusted, factually accurate news source, insert humor. Taking the tone of a traditional news media publication, the Bee satirizes real-world events and public figures. Dillon's experience with censorship and deplatforming has placed him on the front lines of the battle for free speech in the public square. He now speaks on college campuses and at conferences across the country. He was most recently just in Dallas before he came here, about the effectiveness of humor, the moral imperative of mockery, and the dangers of censorship. He occasionally signs off of Twitter to enjoy time with his wife and 2 sons hailing from Juno Beach, Florida. So with that, can we give a really warm welcome to Seth Dillon and Pastor Alec Rollins.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see you here tonight. How many of you are from Westgate Chapel? All right. How many not from Westgate Chapel? Well, y'all could take us over tonight, you know that. I'm so glad you're here. We honestly, we do this as a rallying point for folks in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if there are many places besides California where a conservative point of view is kind of marginalized as much as it seems to be. And it seems like the further we get on in life, the more it feels like we're shoved off to some isolated position somewhere. And so to get together with a large group of people and say, hey, we believe in conservative values, we believe in biblical values, is just a wonderful thing. So thank you to those of you who are not from Westgate. We're honored to have you tonight. Mike has already done a great job. We will not be hiring him as a writer. But did a great job of introducing Seth. And I just thought, welcome, Seth. We're honored to have you all the way from Florida here. Thank you for coming to Little Pacific Northwest.
Honored to be here. Thank you.
I want to start with some of your personal journey. Got your permission for this before we came out. You're a preacher's kid. Give us a little bit of your background that will help us understand how you were shaped and prepared for the role that you're serving in the nation right now.
Well, I was born in Washington, D.C., of all places. The swamp, they call it. In 1983, so that makes me 41 years old, which is just sad. My back hurt on the flight here because I didn't have proper lumbar support. But I was raised, my dad was a pastor from the earliest I can remember. I was in the church, with my dad preaching on Sunday mornings, and he's retired now, but he pastored all through my childhood and into young adulthood. And so I grew up on the inside of the church and in Sunday school and attending youth group, and I became a Christian at a very early age. It was when I went off to college that I started to test and challenge my own faith by reading more widely and trying to get a handle on, this is called APOLOGIA. I started studying apologetics, and what a rich world that is when you get into that. Because I found, especially as I was reading a lot of the other viewpoints, like Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion and stuff like this, that these arguments are not sophisticated. They're not sophisticated. They're mostly emotionally driven, ad hominem, just fallacious-ridden nonsense. And so my faith was only strengthened when I started reading more widely of the people who were challenging it. So my background is in the church. I thought about going to seminary. When I was debating where I would go to school, I did attend Dallas Theological Seminary briefly, which is where my dad got his degree. But I ended up going to Palm Beach Atlantic University in West Palm Beach, Florida. That's where I went to college. And there I wasn't sure what I was going to, I actually wanted to be a writer. So that does tie in some with what I do, but I had no idea how I would, eventually make money doing that, or whether I could make money ever doing satire. I did write satire in college. I downloaded the entire email list for the school and the faculty and staff, and was sending anonymously satire to the whole school, which I don't recommend, because they don't like that, and they hunt you down, and they do find you eventually. So I almost got kicked out of a Christian college for writing satire. So that was kind of some of the groundwork being laid, maybe, for the future. If only they knew, that I would eventually run the Babylon Bee. But yeah, I ended up graduating with a degree in business management. My first job was at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, of all places. And that's where I met my wife, actually. She wrecked her car and needed a rental. So we're literally in love and married and have kids because she's a bad driver, and the funny thing is, though, she asked me out after that night, after I rented her the car. So we're together because she pursued me. And it is funny, though, that Enterprise's tagline is "We'll pick you up." I think that's very appropriate. So where am I going with this? And now I own the Babylon Bee. So I fast forwarded a little bit, but we can get into some of how that happened. But if you'd like to.
Yeah. So a lot of your opinions, thoughts on the biblical positions that we would hold dear were shaped in those early years. And did you ever think that you'd become a defender of those in something like Babylon Bee?
No. I was, I guess in a way I was prepared for it, but was never expecting it or planning for it. It was God's preparation. It was just, it was just how I grew up. So there was no plan there. And honestly, a lot of what I do now, I wasn't necessarily trained for then either. I think, yes, the biblical worldview was instilled in me at a very early age, and I think that's important. It's one of the things that I encourage people to do now, because you have competitive worldviews that people are trying to plant in the minds and hearts of children and cultivate those. And we have to plant the truth there first. That's very, very important. So I was a lucky beneficiary of that, but it certainly wasn't a plan where I knew exactly where I was going to be going. You want to equip your kids to be prepared for wherever life might lead them.
Yeah. Do you have children?
I do. 2 boys, 10 and 8. Yes.
10 and 8.
Yeah.
Are they in public school?
They're in private school. They go to a Christian school.
What's public school like in Florida? Is it pretty safe?
Well, Florida's a big state, so I'm sure there are some not great public schools, but we have good public schools in our area.
Yeah. So how did you transition from the rental car business to Babylon Bee?
Well, I didn't last there very long. I don't know if you've ever washed a car while wearing a suit in Florida. It's not fun. So I did that for only like 6 months. And I actually got into the internet marketing world. I started working for these marketing agencies. This is back when like Google was first taking off, and companies were starting to spend a lot of money on internet marketing. And so I got into that world very early on, and then having a bunch of different clients was like having a lot of different bosses. And so I didn't love the agency model. And so I looked for every opportunity I could to be entrepreneurial. And I eventually just quit my job. I started some businesses. I had some failures. I had some successes. Acquired some properties, sold some. And so I was an entrepreneur, just kind of doing e-commerce and lead generation and internet marketing and all kinds of different things before the Bee finally came across my radar. And it was a church joke that caught my attention initially. Actually, it was one of those. I think it was the Holy Spirit unable to move through congregation as fog machine breaks, and it's and there's an image of an auditorium so cloudy you can barely make out the stage. That kind of humor caught my attention instantly. Being a pastor's kid and growing up in the church, I just thought this was great. This is funny. It's not cheesy. It's self-deprecating because it's making fun of the church, but in a lighthearted way, not in a malicious way. Yeah. and I think that's instructive and insightful and helpful. And so I liked everything about it. And so I reached out to the founder of The Bee. His name is Adam Ford. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Adam Ford. Some people were fans of his before he started The Bee because he had a internet comic thing that he was running. I reached out to him and I asked him if he wanted an investor or something, like to help him get it, to grow the business, because at the time I think it was just him running the operation. And he said no, he was actually selling it to the Daily Wire. So he had a deal all worked out with the Daily Wire at that time. And they backed out at the last minute. So he came back to me and he said, well, if you can match their offer, I'll sell it to you. I was like, I don't know if I want to buy it. What am I going to do with it? I'm busy, I'm running these other businesses. I don't know the first thing about running a satire site on the internet. How would I monetize that? I don't know. I'm sure I could figure it out though. So I flew to Michigan and met with him, and we had a beer and we talked and we liked each other and we worked out a deal. So that was in early 2018. I took it over.
Wow, what perfect timing.
Yeah.
So how many of you follow the Bee, the Babylon Bee? Okay, all righty. All right. So you're probably very familiar with things that Seth and the staff do. Catherine and I did some research, mostly Catherine, to get ready for tonight. And we ran into a video of an interview that you did with Joe Rogan. And obviously, you're a brave man to go into an environment like that. But you and he got into it a little bit concerning abortion and the sanctity of life. And I was so grateful for you as a spokesman for the rest of us with the way you conducted that. We've got, in case
Let me tell you before you start it,
Yeah.
I had a friend who watches Rogan all the time, and I don't have time. These are like 3-hour episodes. I mean, I like Rogan, but I can't watch every 3-hour episode that comes out, and he watches a lot of them. And he said, whatever you do, don't get into a debate about abortion with Rogan, because you're gonna butt heads, and it could get really contentious. And I don't know. I don't know who brought it up. I don't know if maybe he planted a seed in my mind, and I felt like I had to talk about it. I don't know. But yeah, I was warned not to do this. But
So watch the clip. Aren't you grateful for a voice like that in the nation? When Catherine and I first previewed this, I said to her, does Joe Rogan have a smoke machine and he's off? She said, no, he smokes a cigar. So that's why I don't watch Joe Rogan. But wow, thank you.
I inhaled a lot of secondhand smoke during that interview. And drinking whiskey during a debate only works up to a point. I'll tell you that. You get a couple hours into it, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to put out those syllogisms without making mistakes.
Yeah. One of the points that you made in an interview we watched, marvelous interview that you did with Tucker Carlson, you talked about the concept that satire is about the moral imperative of mockery. I've never heard that before, never thought before. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. When I talk about the moral imperative of mockery, what I'm talking about is the fact that we have, so I'll give you a quote and then piggyback on that quote. And one of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis. There's probably some C.S. Lewis fans in the room. He said, good philosophy must exist if for no other reason because bad philosophy needs to be answered. That's why we need good philosophy. And I think we need satire for the same reason. There are bad ideas. And these bad ideas are like social cancers. And they will eventually kill the host if they're not dealt with properly and excised from the host. And so I think religious satire, if you're doing satire from a worldview perspective that values life and truth and goodness and beauty, then what you're going to set your sights on is anything that undermines those things and is detracting from them or threatening them. And so there are bad ideas permeating our culture, and they need to be dealt with in an effective way. And one of the most effective ways to do that is to mock the heck out of them. And you have, there's another favorite author of mine who you're probably also fans of, is Chesterton, who said humor can get in under the door while seriousness is still fumbling at the handle. And I love that quote too, because he's highlighting the way that humor is very effective in addressing some things that you could argue with somebody about, and you may get into a debate like I did with Rogan there, and you might end up changing somebody's minds, but sometimes it's just the way that you present your case that can be very disarming if you're using humor. So it's not so confrontational, and maybe it can slip past their defenses. And so mockery is an effective way of doing that. There's also the element that comes into play where you have people who have abandoned rationality on purpose. We've seen a lot of that, people who are literally looking you in the face and saying that 2 and 2 make 5, and they want you to agree with them, Yeah, you can be a boy trapped in a girl's body. Yes, men can get pregnant, that kind of stuff. Sure, drag shows are great for kids. Those kinds of things, when people have abandoned rationality altogether and they're saying irrational things and they're exulting in their irrationality, sometimes reasoning with them isn't even an option. It's like trying to give medicine to a dead man. What's the point? But you can ridicule their terrible ideas and expose the foolishness for what it is so that it isn't taken seriously. And if you do that, then you can actually you can set children up for success, because they'll grow up in a world where these things are mocked and ridiculed and not taken seriously, and then they won't take them seriously. The problem we have now is that we're confusing kids and then affirming them in their confusion. And I think this is what you do. If you hate children and want them to suffer, you will affirm them when they're wrong about who and what they are. But if you love them and want them to flourish, you'll correct them and instruct them in the way they should go. And so when I talk about the moral imperative of mockery, I'm talking about the necessity to make fun of that which deserves to be made fun of, without being mean and cruel. Because this is the thing, often it will often be Christians in our audience who come to us and say, hey, look, I normally like what you're doing and whatever, but you talk about mockery and you're mocking things and ridiculing. I can't get on board with that because that's bullying, essentially. And I'm not condoning bullying. I think that bullying is wrong, obviously, because the purpose of bullying is to make somebody feel bad about themselves, and that's or intimidate them, and that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is protect people from bad ideas that will make them feel bad about themselves or have harmful effects in the future. And so there's a very significant but subtle distinction when you're talking about the differences of different kinds of mockery. To expose foolishness is not the same as bullying someone to make them feel bad. Yeah. And so we have to keep that very clear. And I think there is biblical precedent for mockery of that kind.
Yeah. Do you ever consider what you do to have a prophetic nature to it? And I'm not saying that to be funny.
Oh, well, it is funny because we are unintentionally prophetic, because we will make jokes that then later come true. Yeah. And we track these in a spreadsheet now. I think we've got like 104 of these, which started out as satire and then came true. I think maybe only The Simpsons is ahead of us with more prophecies fulfilled. But that does happen, and it's kind of the nature of the fact that we're trying to do satire at a time when the world is so crazy and like satire. It's not just typical comedy where you're just going for laughs. It's a form of caricaturing and parodying that which is out there in the real world. And so you have to, if you're doing an artist who does caricatures is exaggerating your features, right? Yeah. Well, what if you already look like a crazy, caricature already? Then what do they do with your features? Yeah. You exaggerate them even more. Well, that's the problem that we have now. It's trying to make jokes that are funnier than what politicians are already doing in real life, and that's not. Imagine trying to write jokes that are funnier than a Kamala Harris speech, for example, or it's just. It's genuinely challenging, and then if you do successfully do it, then something happens where 2 weeks later, a real headline sounds just like the joke that you made, and it's like, well, we were a step ahead of reality for a minute.
Yeah, yeah. the role of the church is to be prophetic also, not necessarily foretelling, but attacking a culture that has abandoned God and calling it back to righteousness. And when I asked if you viewed what you do as prophetic, I think there's also a very challenging element to what you do, which, and again, becomes part of that moral imperative of mockery. Now, I know everyone's here to hear you and not me, but a good friend of mine who teaches Old Testament theology at Lee University has examined the Old Testament prophets and has identified that they fall into 4 categories. There's the prophet who is a messenger, and they have a word from the Lord for the people or for the king. Then there's a prophet who is a minstrel, and it's amazing how much of the prophetic literature in the Old Testament is written in some form of poetry or some metaphor. And then there's the prophet who's called a madman, and then the prophet who is a martyr. But I wonder if the Babylon Bee falls into the category of the prophet as a minstrel that is using the sort of the musicality of satire to poke fun at the ridiculousness of what we're all living right now. I so appreciate what you do. In case there are some of you here who have not ever seen Babylon Bee, Catherine has pulled sort of a montage of their, and I'm going to ask Seth if he'll comment on them. Here's the first one about the Pharisees.
Oh, there it is. A Pharisees accused Jesus of threatening to capture his enemies in nets and kill them with latest fishers of men comment. Well, you know, the way that the media will sometimes interpret what someone they don't like says in the least charitable way possible, in the most literal way possible, I think is worth making fun of, because it just shows how disingenuous they are. And so that's what we're going for here, putting a, you know, obviously a biblical twist on it.
Yeah. And the next one.
This is actually a very good idea. I think he should try it. Let's make this a fulfilled prophecy. I don't know. You know, maybe there were reasons for these squatters' laws at some point. I think some of the rationale behind it was that property shouldn't go unused or something like that. But the idea that you can trespass in someone's home for long enough that it eventually becomes yours is absolutely insane to me.
It is.
That is insane. And how we haven't corrected for that is pretty wild.
Yeah.
Maybe the Supreme Court will deal with that at some point.
Here, next one.
January 6th protesters request to be called undocumented tourists. Just make them documented, you know?
Yeah, next one.
Now, that's one of those, it's hard to tell if it's real or satire. You never know with Joe Biden.
No.
I mentioned Kamala Harris, but a Joe Biden speech is impossible to satirize. It's mostly gibberish, and then he shakes hands with no one and then falls over.
Yeah, we are living in crazy days.
We are living in crazy times. DOJ sues Texas saying it's against the law to pass the law to enforce the law. A lot of our headlines, some of the fulfilled prophecies that we have revolve around Texas. The California and Texas thing. We did a joke about how Gavin Newsom was named U-Haul Salesperson of the Year, and then it was like a month later that Fox Business put out a story saying that they had literally run out of U-Hauls because of so many people fleeing California for Texas specifically.
Yeah.
So, what can you do?
Yeah.
Mayor who advertised city as sanctuary for criminals perplexed over a large number of criminals. it is amazing. The sanctuary city thing is interesting because they love the virtue signaling of being able to say, we are a sanctuary city, But then, God forbid, you send them, anyone that needs sanctuary, they freak out. They're like, what are you doing sending them to us? It's like, well, you put a big sign up saying, send them here.
Yeah.
So... yeah, it's all, that's what exposes it. When they object to it, that's what exposes it as just virtue signaling, because they don't actually want to do it.
Yeah.
All of these people who want to accuse you of not loving your neighbor because you don't want a completely open border. You want no security. You don't want a sovereign nation. They accuse you of not loving your neighbor. Those people are not welcoming random people off the street into their homes and refusing to lock their doors at night and not caring about their own security.
Yeah.
I did speak to one guy who said that he thinks it's, he's so dead set on this view that we don't love our neighbors if we don't have open borders, that he was willing to say, I asked him about his home, a home invasion situation, and he said he would either flee with his family or die, but he would not defend himself. And he believed that was the Christian position, is that this is a man with a wife and children who believed that he shouldn't lift a finger to try to defend his own family. I don't know how these ideas have come to so permeate our culture, but I think that's deserving of mockery.
It almost feels like it's been overnight, though. And I know it's come on to us gradually, but my word, our trip into lunacy has just been so sudden.
Yeah.
Newsom deploys giant can of Febreze over San Francisco.
Now, while it does look real, I find that unrealistic. Probably satire.
It was amazing. Was this written before or after they cleaned up the city for the Chinese dignitaries?
It got cleaned quick, too. You're talking about something happening overnight. The streets were cleared.
Yeah.
That was pretty amazing. So they can do it. They're capable of it. They have the resources to do it if they want to.
All right, this is close to home right here.
Church shouldn't be political, says pastor with BLM pride flags on building. Yeah.
All right. Well, this next one, which will launch us into another subject, this next one was what got you into Twitter jail right here.
Do you want the backstory on this one?
Yeah, talk to us about that, please.
So, this was one of those jokes. We knew it was going to get us in trouble. And
this was pre-Elon Musk.
this is pre-Elon Musk. This was in 2022, March of 2022. And you had, a hateful conduct policy that prohibits misgendering, which, in my view, is when a male person refers to himself as a woman. That's misgendering. I think Rachel Levine misgenders himself, but according to their worldview, which is baked into the terms of service, and it's a enforceable policy violation if you go against it, misgendering is if you don't honor someone's chosen identity. And so we knew that we could get in trouble with this joke, and it was interesting. We had this debate back and forth because the real headline, that this is a parody of a real headline. There was a real headline that came out in USA Today that had named Rachel Levine Woman of the Year. And, we saw that. It's like, it's a man in a dress being named Woman of the Year. I mean, isn't that offensive to women, for one thing? I think so. We shouldn't be giving men the awards that should be going to women. Without they're dominating women's sports and all this nonsense. So the real headline seemed like a joke. This is one of those examples of something, it felt like it was straight out of a South Park episode or something. It's like, this is parody already. And so how do you satirize it? How do you exaggerate it? Well, there was no way to really exaggerate it. So one of our writers just put a twist on it and said, well, why don't we just name Rachel Levine our pick for Man of the Year? And that way we're at least telling the truth, And this was an internal Slack conversation that we were having. And Kyle, our editor-in-chief, replied and said, dude, you're going to get us kicked off Twitter. And Joel replied, the one who pitched it, and said, I know, LOL. So they weren't taking it very seriously. But the interesting thing about that conversation, and this is something that I like to point out, is that they count on you having these kinds of conversations. And that type of reasoning, knowing that this is going to get you in trouble, results in a lot of self-censorship. And so you have the problem. We have the obvious problem of what I call hard censorship, which is when they actually take down content that you've posted. But what happens 100 times or 1,000 times more often than that is when people, knowing that there's going to be hard censorship if they put it up or some kind of penalty, will censor themselves and never even post it in the first place. And so, we have a pretty firm policy that we're not going to do that. We're not going to engage in that soft censorship, which literally is doing the tyrant's work for him. We don't want to do the tyrant's work for him and censor ourselves. So we decided, let's put it out there and see what happens. Maybe we do get suspended, but at least we told the joke that we felt needed to be told. And so we published it, and within 24 hours, the trans activist got a hold of it, mass reported it, and we got a notice from Twitter saying that we needed to delete the tweet in order to regain access to our account. And the crazy thing about it was, first of all, they could have taken it down, right? That would have been censorship. But instead, they wanted us to take it down and check a box acknowledging that we violated the terms, specifically the hateful conduct policy, admitting we were wrong and that we engaged in hateful conduct. And so we couldn't in good conscience do that. So, of course, we appealed it and lost our appeal very quickly. I'm trying to remember what we put in the form when we filled it out and appealed it. We're like, well, this dude is a man. And it's a joke. So what do you want from us? They denied our appeal. And so we were stuck. We were like, all right, well, that's it, so long Twitter, because we're not deleting the joke. So I actually made a public statement about it, and I said, we decided behind the scenes that we weren't going to delete it. This was a hill worth dying on. The fact that you should be able to say in the public square that a male person is a man, because that's what the word man means. You should be allowed to say that. So we refused to take it down, and that's when, it was a couple of days later that we got a call from a number we didn't recognize, and it was Elon Musk who, wanted to know if we had in fact been censored for telling a joke. Like, were we locked out? Because he'd heard that we were locked out. And in fact, he'd actually tried messaging us before this. He sent us a DM on Twitter, which we could read but not reply to because our account was locked. And so we had a message from Elon Musk sitting in our inbox saying, have you guys been suspended? And we couldn't respond to it.
Was this before he began negotiating for Twitter?
It was at the time when he had started buying up Twitter stock. So he hadn't been offered a board seat yet, and he hadn't made an offer on Twitter yet. But he was looking at Twitter as a problem, a speech problem, where he was seeing that people were being censored for their viewpoints, their political viewpoints. And then when he saw that we were being censored for making a joke, he called us and he was like, look, comedy should be legal. You should be allowed to tell jokes. And then at the end of that call, he was like, he kind of mused aloud. He goes, maybe I just need to buy Twitter. And yeah, we thought he was joking. We honestly didn't think he was being serious. We kind of laughed at that, yeah, it would be nice, please do, And so we hung up the phone with him and didn't know that he was actually going to make a move at some point to buy Twitter. But he did ask us why we didn't delete the tweet, and we explained our reasons, and he said, you have integrity, good for you. So, Musk respected that. And he genuinely cares about the issue of speech, and largely because he's concerned about these bad ideas, the bad ideas that need to be refuted and that need to be ridiculed. He spoke to us at length about wokeness and the danger that wokeness poses to civilization. And I asked him, when we interviewed him before all of this happened, we had interviewed him back in 2021, and I asked him why he thought wokeness was so terrible. And he said, these are his words, he said, wokeness is divisive, exclusionary, and hateful. It basically gives mean people an excuse to be cruel while armored in false virtue. And that's true. He wasn't defining it there. He was explaining why it's a problem. And then he turned to us and he goes, well, what do you guys think? And we're like, well, can't say it any better than that. we were just nodding along, but he's right. You know, wokeness, which pits the oppressor against the oppressed, and looks for wrongs and injustices even where they don't exist, so that you can feel good about resolving them by creating new injustices to fix even imaginary ones that are no longer an issue. You know, wokeness is behind the policy that prevented us from telling this joke. Wokeness undergirds the policy that says you can't punch down in comedy. Punching down in comedy, it's a thing. They call it punching down, where you are up here with power and privilege, and you're not allowed to joke about people who are down here who lack power and privilege. And that's considered punching down. And it's the weirdest thing in the world when you're a comedian. You know, really the thing that you should be thinking when you're writing a joke is this joke funny? That's the first rule of comedy, right? Is it gonna make people laugh? But now you have to be thinking about whether you're gonna get deplatformed, whether you're going to be punching down on someone who's beneath you. Imagine thinking to yourself, you know what? I shouldn't tell that joke about those people. They're beneath me. A little condescending, isn't it? Is that really the mentality that you want to be? I think the way of treating each other equally is to joke about each other indiscriminately. But beyond that, people like Rachel Levine, white, male, high-ranking government official, on the cover of USA Today, winning Woman of the Year. I mean, if the word marginalized applies to that person, then what does marginalized even mean? Yeah. Dillon Mulvaney on the red carpet with cameras flashing everywhere and being sponsored by major brands is not marginalized, okay? These people have more power than anyone else in our culture and society. They have not just the power. If you have both, the combination of both the power and the will to silence and punish anyone who so much as makes a joke at your expense, if you have all the institutional power backing you up to insulate you from jokes that might hurt your feelings, you're one of the most powerful people who's ever lived. You have power on the level of what kings used to have. I don't have the kind of power to silence and suppress anyone who makes a joke about me. I don't have that power. And I'm a white, straight Christian male. I'm supposed to be at the top of that privilege tower. So, you know, the idea that we are punching down where we're telling a joke like that is absolutely false. It is the opposite of what they say it is. We're punching up. I like to describe it as punching back, but technically it's punching up, because these are the powers that be imposing their radical ideology on us from the top down. And God forbid we do the comedian's job and poke holes in it. Mm.
Obviously not looking for numbers, but that was a costly decision when you refused to capitulate, because you were counting on the monetization from Twitter, right, for a lot of your revenue.
Yeah, I thought you were going to talk longer, so I had time for water. And it was a very short question. We were very aware of, you know, Twitter drives a decent amount of traffic for us. It's never been the best traffic driver. The best used to be Facebook. Facebook is a shadow of what it once was at this point. We're pretty heavily throttled there, and many others are too. But you drive a lot of traffic on these platforms. It's how a business like ours survives, because we're a media company. You know, we put out content. That content attracts readership, and people share it, and clicks come through to the website, and that's how we're able to sell ads and ad space on the site, monetize the site, convert people into subscribers, or sell them merchandise or books or whatever. And so, you know, we need the social platforms to be able to reach an audience, to be able to do business. And if we can't reach them, then we can't do business. But also, it's just being in the conversation. So when you're on these platforms, you are your content is in front of influential people who will then share it to their audiences. You know, like if we weren't on Twitter, then we wouldn't be getting engagement from people like Ted Cruz or Joe Rogan or Elon Musk or any of these people who comment on or share our posts to their very large, much larger than ours audience. So it's hard to put, you know, when you mention numbers, like I can't even quantify what the cost is to being removed from a platform where you get that kind of engagement and where that's possible. it's hard to put a figure on that. But we knew that we would be giving up something if we refused to delete that joke. But we also knew that we'd be giving up something I think even more valuable if we did delete it. Because giving up the principle and allowing ourselves going along with that pressure to censor ourselves and refusing to speak the truth just further feeds the problem, you know? And so, my position on these things, like when the cancel mob comes after somebody, I tell them never apologize to the cancel mob, because what you do is you feed it, you encourage it that what they're doing is working. What the cancel mob needs is to be starved of all apologies so that they learn that it doesn't work anymore and they stop doing it. That's how you defeat the cancel mob. Well, with the censorship, the only way to defeat the censorship regime is to stop censoring ourselves and make them censor all of us. Make them censor hundreds of millions of us, and then see how they survive and what kind of revenue they can generate when we're all blocked and banned. So that's kind of my attitude towards that. But there was a tremendous cost, and we were aware of that. And there were times when we questioned, did we do the right thing? Because there was no view of we didn't know that Elon Musk was going to buy Twitter. When we made the decision to not delete the tweet, we did not know that. Nobody did. So we got very lucky that he was looking out for us.
Do you think you were obviously close enough to him in that process? Do you believe that his motivation was protecting free speech?
Yes.
In buying Twitter?
Certainly wasn't money. Yeah, he gave up a lot of money, and his reputation has been absolutely decimated as a result of this, because he's been lumped in with the far-right extremists. He's a free speech guy now. That's far-right extremism. Right? I mean, he's critical, vocally critical of wokeness, radical gender ideology. He thinks that puberty blockers and sterilization of children should be criminalized. He's pushing back on these things, and he's sacrificed a great deal to give other people the right to push back on these things. So he's become public enemy number one for the media and everybody on the left that has any institutional power. So this is the only platform where you have somebody with that mentality in charge of it. And so yes, he values free speech very much, to the point where he was willing to tell Disney and their mountain of money that he doesn't want it. He's like, if you're going to try to hold your money over my head and manipulate what I do and try to make me censor more people by holding money over my head, like, you think that's going to work with me? He said, no. There are some things that matter more than money to people with principle, and I think he's one of them. Honestly, I think he's one of them.
Yeah. So I know. Yeah. Thank you. When we were chatting back behind the stage, you commented that you don't want a venue like this to be used to in a sense, sell your product, but at the same time, the size of your audience gives you a level of authority to keep doing what you're doing. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. The way that I put it is, I don't like to be self-promotional and please subscribe and support the Babylon Bee, which you can do at babylonbee.com/plans. I don't. It's just a joke. You don't have to do that right now. You can do it after you leave. But at the same time, it does give us a lot of flexibility and confidence and freedom to not care so much if we do lose these platforms, because we do have an army of subscribers at our back. We have about 50,000 of them right now. Which is tremendous, because we have millions of dollars in overhead. We have roughly 40 people right now in the company. There's a lot of salaries to pay, a lot of mouths to feed, and we're continuing to grow and do bigger, more expensive things, like creating shows and entertainment stuff that goes beyond just the news satire. And so to be independent and not have to worry about those platforms because our subscribers are supporting us is just, that's a huge blessing.
Yeah. Do you think the freedom that Elon Musk has brought to X or Twitter, is it affecting the other platforms, you think, to soften some of their position, or do you see them being just as hard-nosed?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes at those other companies. I do know the general tendency on the left, the secular progressive left, is to always want more censorship, not less, because from their vantage point, from the woke vantage point, censorship prevents harm. If you stop comedians from telling offensive jokes, then nobody's feelings get hurt. Isn't that a good thing? Don't we want to live in a world where no one's feelings ever get hurt? And no one laughs? You want a humorless but not harmful world? I think removing humor from the world is harmful, but that's just my opinion. They want to see more censorship. They think that that's a moral good, is censoring more and more. And it's just great. You were telling me a lot about the COVID stuff that was going on. I think the COVID thing really, it illustrated to me why the censorship regime is so wrong and how they can't even come close to defending what they do. I'll give you a great example because I testified before Congress on the censorship stuff last year, and one of the questions I was dealing with a question about misinformation and censorship on social media and whether or not it was right for them to have been censoring COVID misinformation, and the defense that was offered was, well, we censored based on what we knew at the time. So we were taking down based on what we knew. That's why we were telling people that they couldn't say this. You couldn't say that the vaccine wasn't 100% effective because at the time we thought that it was. Well, if you're censoring based on what you thought was true at the time, what you're conceding is knowledge changes over time. And if knowledge changes over time, if we do in fact learn new things and we come to find out that yesterday we were wrong, then isn't that a knockdown argument against any censorship at all, ever? Because you may end up censoring someone saying something true?
Yeah.
So the fact that they try to use that as their excuse for silencing people, that is the reason why you shouldn't censor. Debate should be how you arrive at the truth. It's the fastest way to arrive at the truth. If you stifle debate, you only delay how quickly we get to the truth. So the arguments for censorship on these platforms are terrible. I don't know if X and Elon's philosophy is having an impact on those other platforms, but it at least has given us a place where we have some assurance, as long as he's in charge there, that you won't have that heavy-handed censorship.
Yeah. I thought it was hilarious watching you and Tucker talk in your interview with him about you're getting fact checked. Your posts get fact checked.
Yeah. Well, that was how censorship started for us. Right when I got involved back in 2018, the first one that we ever had get fact checked that penalized us was a joke about how CNN had purchased an industrial-sized washing machine to spin the news in before publishing it. Which... And the image was just a big washing machine with a CNN logo on it. And Snopes at the time was a Facebook fact-checking partner. And so this is back in 2018, it's 6 years ago now. So Snopes rates it false, okay? And then Facebook sends us a message and says that if you keep publishing misleading false stories on your page, we will demonetize and deplatform you. Like, over a washing machine joke? Really? So, and that just kept happening. We did, AOC goes on The Price is Right, guesses everything is free, and that got rated false. Really outrageous jokes. Ninth Circuit Court overturns death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And
that got fact checked.
That got fact checked. That one, so I thought that joke, because we made it shortly after Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, I thought we were going to get criticism for joking too soon about her death. I didn't know that everyone was going to believe it was true, and that USA Today was going to have to fact check it. And they cited 15 sources in their lengthy refutation of that joke, which is just, that to me is funnier than the joke.
Yes.
When they spend all this time researching where it came from, and it came from the Babylon Bee. What is the Babylon Bee? Let's look into that. Let's call the Ninth Circuit Court and check their website and look at that. It's just insane. But the really interesting thing with that one was when you scroll down to the bottom of that fact check, in italic font, small font at the bottom, it said this fact check was paid for by grants from Facebook. So Facebook was giving money to the fact checkers, who were then paying teams of people to read our jokes and rate them false, so that Facebook could then threaten us with demonetization and deplatforming for publishing fake news. How insane is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where the censorship started for us. It was only later that we started running into issues with, the hateful conduct and incitement to violence and things like that, because we dared, make jokes about how men can't become women and stuff like that.
Wow, this hour has flown by. We're going to take a break. We want to encourage you to take advantage of some of the good folks' tables out in the lobby who are doing a lot of the, one of the things that happens here at Apologia, hopefully, is that your appetite for the truth is encouraged, and hopefully it's not a source of discouragement, but your next question would be, this is great to be alerted. What can we do? And it's the folks in the lobby that are going to help you figure out what to do next. So please take a look at those information out at the table, and we'll be back in 15 minutes with your questions, and Seth will tackle some of your questions. So we look forward to having you back. God bless.
Alrighty, welcome back. For those of you in the lobby, make your way on back. You guys sent in so many questions. I'm really excited for this second half of the program. While Seth was talking, I decided to try my hand one more time at writing Babylon Bee headlines. Are you surprised? No, you're not. So here's my latest. Host adds applause sign to forehead, claims it's for medical reasons. Y'all, this is mostly for my entertainment, and hopefully you're entertained too. We really appreciate you guys being here. There are a myriad of ways to support both our guests, so please follow the Babylon Bee on all social media platforms. Subscribe to the newsletter, become a member, buy swag, however you want to support the Babylon Bee would be awesome. But there's also many ways to support Apologia. Obviously, you've heard this many times. Apologia is not a budgeted Westgate Chapel program. This was created kind of in response to the things that we saw during COVID and post, and this continues to be a program that lives separately outside of the church budget and on its own. And it's been a testament to God's grace and provision that the funding keeps coming through folks like yourself. So this is my plea, quite honestly. I love this program. I love that I get to do this. And more importantly, I love that I get to learn myself. I hope you guys find this to be beneficial. I would ask you guys to pray about supporting this program. We have an incredible lineup that I'll talk about in a second for the rest of this year, but honestly, we ask the Lord each year, do you want this program to continue? And then help us to find the funding to continue it. And God keeps answering that call. So I'm asking each of you to consider 3 different ways to support this program. So online at westgatechapel.com, you can go and you can put in a line item to say this tithe or this donation is a better word. It's not a tithe. The donation is going to support Apologia. There are envelopes. There are little black boxes outside of each of the doorways. Even a $5 bill. Look, there's a lot of us here. $5 from each person goes a long way to support the next program. And then finally, there's a QR code. So if you take a picture of that QR code, it takes you right to the site to help support this program. And I wanted to bring up a special guest. I just covered the ways to support it, but I get to live and am married to the lady who oversees this program, who finds these speakers, who works on these questions, who does all of the research. And so I thought it would be awesome if you could welcome my wife, Catherine Wydell, to say a few words about Apologia.
I want an applause sign for me. I'm just kidding. Michael gave me a list of jokes I was allowed to say as I was up here, but I just don't think I can deliver them as amazingly as he can. But I just wanted to thank you all for your support, for coming tonight. To reiterate what he said, these events are completely funded by donations, by your donations. They're not funded at all by Westgate Chapel, by our general budget, by the offerings that are given on Sundays. That stays for the ministries of Westgate Chapel. But Apologia is completely funded by you guys. So we would love your help to continue this. And what else was I supposed to talk about? You said all of the things that I was supposed to say.
I messed up.
Yeah, he messed up. Hey.
The next Apologia will be about how to save your marriage, so look forward to that one. I will be one of the guests on the example of what not to do. So I did totally cover. Can you give her just a really, it would help me. It helped me a lot. In the middle of talking about giving, I was like, oh, this was supposed to be my wife's part. Speaking of the incredible lineup that she's been able to put together, we have April 14th. It's awesome that I feel like we're getting to see each other pretty frequently. On April 14th, so just a few weeks from now, Mike Pompeo is coming here for the next Apologia. And then on June 9th, one of our favorite reoccurring guests, Eric Metaxas, is coming back. So we want to give you a little taste of what's to come, so please roll the clip.
Back to my days as CIA director and my very first meeting with Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. President Trump had asked me to go there to try and right the ship of our relationship and try to get the nuclear weapons out of Chairman Kim's hands. I'd prepared for the moment for months. We had lots of things we thought we would talk about, but his first words to me were, Mr. Director, I didn't think you'd show up since you've been trying to kill me. So in the moment, I said, Mr. Chairman, maybe I still am. Thankfully, he laughed like you did after it was translated. But while a touch humorous, I think it was important. He knew that I was serious and that we were going to protect America no matter the cost to any one American. The threats we face today are no less demanding than those that faced our parents and our grandparents who fought in World War II, in Vietnam and Korea, and the young people today who fought our wars in the Middle East.
And the Lord is calling his church now, using what happened to the German church as an example to say, American church, now you have to wake up. Now you must live out your faith. And I will let things get ugly to help you understand that this is where things go when the church is silent, when the church says, we just want to preach our little gospel. We don't want to bother with all that stuff. We don't want to be divisive. We just want to preach our gospel. And the idea that you have to choose between preaching the gospel and living out your faith and all these things, that's kind of like, you know, when people say like, well, you can't love your country. You're a citizen of the kingdom. It's like, oh, I can't be both. My faith in God causes me to love America.
It's hour 2. I'm super excited. Can you please welcome back Seth, Dillon, and Pastor Alec Rollins.
Well, you had some amazing questions, so we're going to jump right in on them. Seth, do you have materials, books, magazines? If not, do you intend to publish?
We have a lot of these to get through, so I'll try to be pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
We do have a guide series, the Babylon Bee Guide to Wokeness, the Babylon Bee Guide to Gender, the Babylon Bee Guide to Democracy. We have a bunch of published books. The Guide to Wokeness was a top 20 overall bestseller on Amazon, which is pretty incredible. So we also have the Sacred Texts of the Babylon Bee, which is like a best of collection. It's a large coffee table book. That one is really great, and we're working on a volume 2 for that. So we don't put out like a newspaper or magazine or anything like that. It's all, the articles and everything are all digital except for the collections we'll put in books like that.
Have you or any of your employees been threatened? And if so, how do you handle threats?
Yes, unfortunately, we do get threats. In fact, the worst threats I ever get, the worst death threats I ever get are when I defend life, like I did on Rogan's show. I was getting messages from people who were saying things like, "I'm going to prove you're pro-abortion by raping your wife in front of your children." Stuff like that, you know? And we do get occasional death threats into our main inbox, and I'll get personal death threats. And so, you know, security does become a concern at some point, and my wife gets very nervous about all of that. But it's just what happens when you tell the truth to a culture that hates it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Wow. Why do you think those with dictatorial or tyrannical tendencies, like the modern leftists, tend to oppose humor so much?
Well, because if your ideology is so incoherent and indefensible that if you can't even coherently articulate your ideology, because it's so insane, laughably insane, then you're probably going to want to insulate it from criticism, especially the most effective kind of criticism, which is humor and mockery. So I find it very understandable that they would want to clamp down on comedians who are trying to poke holes in their ridiculous narratives, because it really does expose it for foolishness. And there are comedians, by the way. I respect some of the comedians who are pushing back on this very much, because they're doing the job that they should be doing as comedians, and there aren't very many of them. But I'll just cite one example. Bill Maher recently did a monologue on the gender madness, and I disagree with Bill Maher on many things. He thinks religion is ridiculous. By the way, he said, he commenting on the Babylon Bee, he said, "I thought the religion itself was satire. Why is there a Christian satire site out there?" But he did a monologue on the gender ideology stuff and how there are so many young people who are identifying in the LGBTQ plus camp now, and this trend is just going crazy. And he said, you know, we can't trust kids to know what they want to be. He said, if we did that, the world would be filled with cowboys and princesses. And you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pirate. Thank God no one scheduled me for peg leg surgery and eye removal. And now, you laugh, and his audience laughed too, which, to their credit, they laughed at that joke. But I remember thinking to myself, the first time I heard that, I was like, that was not just a joke for laughs. That what he did there was chip away at the validity of an idea that never should have been taken seriously in the first place. More comedians should have been doing it, and he did it at a time when it was considered hateful conduct to do it. So that took courage on his part to actually be willing to make a joke like that, because you can get canceled for making jokes like that. So, well, I think it was maybe, you know, it was mildly funny but profoundly important, that joke. So that is why they want to stop comedy, is because comedians, satirists have the power to expose what they're doing for how insane it is, how crazy it is. You put it in the terms of a pirate and peg leg surgery and eye removal, and suddenly it starts to make a little sense. So yeah, that's why.
It's amazing. I'm going to date myself, but I remember when Johnny Carson would make fun of...
Who?
No, I set myself up for that.
No, I'm old enough.
When he used to make fun of Biden's plagiarism, and there was not the kind of backlash then that you'd get if you did something like that today.
Yeah, most people don't even know about it.
Yeah. Who do you think is behind the efforts to restrict free speech, and what is the end game?
Well, the efforts to restrict free speech are, like I said before, they're aimed at, they act like they're trying to prevent harm, but they're not really trying to prevent harm. The guardians of the narrative, they're guardians of the narrative, not the truth. That's the way that I like to put it. The censorship regime has no concern whatsoever for what's actually true. It's what they want you to believe is true. And so they're guarding the narrative, not the truth. And that's really the purpose behind it. As far as like who's responsible for it, I mean, it's everybody in positions of power in our cultural institutions. You know, the heads of the big tech companies, the large corporations like Disney that were threatening Elon Musk with, you know, these other groups like the ADL and Media Matters and all these activist organizations that are running pressure campaigns to try to increase the censorship. It's all about driving that narrative, driving in the crazy narrative. You know, the narrative that a man can be trapped in a woman's body, that kind of stuff. It's push the companies to put this stuff in their terms of service so that even joking about it is an enforceable policy violation. Like that's where it's coming from. And it's all about insulating and protecting that narrative from the kind of criticism that we direct at it.
Many of the B's jokes are directed towards progressive ideas. Does your team find material to poke fun at Republicans? And do they feel the freedom to do so?
Yes, and it's actually important that we do that. I think that, you know, one of the things that I liked a lot about the Babylon Bee is that it was willing to, throw our own things up on the wall with a projector so we could look at them and examine ourselves. You know, I think humor is most effective. It's always funny when someone else is getting made fun of, right? And then the minute the jokes are aimed at you, suddenly it's, well, I usually like satire, but this time you went too far. We get a lot of those emails. And I think that's when it's, you know, that's when it's most important, is when it's actually bumping up against something that you value, one of your sacred cows that you really, you know, hold dear and don't want made fun of. That's when you can actually grow as a person, by being willing to take yourself less seriously, be willing to say, hey, maybe I'm on the ship of fools from time to time too, and I'm not perfect, and maybe I should be willing to laugh at myself. I think the church needs more laughter. We should be leading with levity, and I think the culture needs more laughter. What exactly was the question? I want to make sure I'm answering it directly.
Does your team find material to poke fun at Republicans?
Yeah,
and
Republicans.
Do you feel the freedom?
Yes. So, you know, one of our most viral jokes we ever did was about how Trump claimed to have done more for Christianity than Jesus himself. And it's a great Trump joke because you could believe that he would say something like that. He says a lot of outlandish things. And he does have a big ego. You can love him, but you got to love him with and his ego, because it's very large. So we made this joke in 2019, and of course it got fact checked because it was being shared very widely. Snopes fact checked it, because even New York Times reporters were retweeting that, thinking it was real. They wanted it to be real because they just wanted to dunk on Trump. And so Snopes rates it false. 2021 rolls around, and he goes on a show, a talk show, and a radio show, Gene Bailey's Flashpoint, I think it was called. And he said he's done more for Christianity and religion in general than any other person in history. So he took it further than the original joke. Forget Jesus and Christianity. I've done more for religions everywhere, more than anyone. So I don't. What do they do with that fact check now? They've rated it false, but now it's come true. I don't know. But that's one of my all-time favorites. And yes, it's a joke at the expense of a Republican, because of course, yeah, there are things that happen on our own side of the political aisle, and not everybody on our staff is Republican necessarily, but we are conservatives. And so we do need to challenge and expose our own hypocrisy and double standards, and be willing to turn at that stuff and laugh at it. That's healthy. It's really healthy.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah, thank you. How do we handle it when liberal press and liberal politicians are twisting the truth and lying about what was said or believed?
Well, I mean, there are a number of ways to deal with that. I think correcting the record is important. You've got to refute lies whenever they come up with the truth. But that's where the fight for free speech comes into play, because you need to have the freedom to do that. You have to be willing to actually confront those things and say what's true. And that's the problem that we've been facing on these platforms. It's why I keep going back to, the fight, even the fight for life, the pro-life discussion, that I was having with Rogan. In order to defend life, you have to be able to speak freely. If you can't speak freely, you can't defend any of our rights.
Yeah.
And so, and you certainly can't defend the truth. And so, that's what I come back to as the fundamental thing that needs to happen is we need to protect our right to speak freely in the public square, and then we can actually refute those lies when they pop up. And some of these platforms allow for that now without censorship. Twitter, for example, now X, has what's called community notes. So the community can actually provide context or correction to a tweet, even if it comes from the president. It doesn't matter who it comes from. It can come from Elon Musk himself. And if he's wrong, the community can correct him, and it can get appended to that without taking the content down.
Yeah.
You have refutation instead of removal,
Yeah.
which is a huge upgrade.
It's part of the dialogue, isn't it?
It's part of the dialogue
Yeah.
and debate, yes. Yeah.
It seems as if a faith-based free speech platform that relies on donations or subscription payments is in danger of being canceled by secular banks and payment systems, another layer of silencing. Can you comment on how we can or are protecting ourselves against this?
It is a big challenge because I mentioned before the threat with the social platforms, kicking us off or whatever, but we have our subscribers backing us. Well, what if our subscribers are using Stripe to support us and Visa, their Visa cards via Stripe to send us, recurring subscription revenue, and Stripe decides not to work with us, or Visa decides not to work with us. Those are all weak points. And ultimately what needs to happen there is, I do think that we need laws that protect us against that kind of discrimination. And so we are very actively involved in any legal recourse we can be. It's weird to go from telling jokes to fighting in the courts. But we are involved. We've submitted briefs in many cases. We've sued attorneys general in different states where laws are either promoting viewpoint discrimination or infringing on our religious freedom or something of that nature. Ultimately, I do think that there will be pushback on some of those things when you have religious organizations that are because of their religious beliefs. This is a First Amendment issue. You're going to have lawsuits that go all the way to the Supreme Court, and our rights are going to be protected. I don't have tremendous fear about that being a long-term problem, but it is a temporary problem.
Yeah. Is it true that you've testified before Congress on these, not necessarily the banking issues, but on free speech issues as well as Supreme Court? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I testified on big tech censorship and free speech and on tech platforms. Yeah. And my argument was that, because what they try to say is that these are private companies, right? They can do whatever they want. And it's not true that private companies can just do whatever they want. For one thing, if they promise you a platform for free expression without barriers, which is direct language from Twitter's mission statement, and they don't offer you that, that's fraud. But secondly, if they are offering themselves up as to the public as a public service, there is a long legal precedent that recognizes that the more you open up your property to the public, the more your rights are circumscribed by the rights of the people who are using your property. And so, the common carrier doctrine that applies to telecommunications companies and transportation companies, I think could very comfortably fit these big tech platforms that are essentially the modern public square. And what that would mean is just simply that their conduct can be regulated in the sense that they can't censor people and say that it's speech, because this is what they argue. They argue that their muzzling of you is their free speech right. And that is as nonsensical as saying war is peace or freedom is slavery. It is Orwellian what they're trying to do there, and they talk out both sides of their mouth with that stuff. So that's what I was there to argue and defend.
Did it surprise you? And this is not one of the questions, but did it surprise you when Elon Musk bought Twitter, and suddenly we were inundated with Twitter files that really proved that there was government interference, and as general public, we just waited with bated breath for that to cause an uproar or something.
Yeah, how do we even know about that? I don't think CNN covered that, did they?
Yeah. Did it surprise you that nothing seemed to come of that?
Well,
or did these hearings?
Yeah, I think that's still all in the works. I do think that there are some lawsuits that are happening behind the scenes, and Elon himself continues to provide funding and support to specific lawsuits along those lines. So I would like to, it is very frustrating that you often have all these congressional hearings and you have all these things, like I went and gave testimony, and you have all this stuff happen where people have these conversations and then nothing ever happens to solve the problem. Yeah. But you do currently have, with the tech censorship stuff, you do at least have right now, and I'll give you a very brief overview of this because we have a lot to get to, but in Texas, there was a law that was passed that prohibits viewpoint discrimination on these platforms. And it was shot down by an Obama-appointed judge, and then the Fifth Circuit Court upheld it and overturned that ruling. So that law got upheld. But then in Florida, there was a similar law that was shot down and was then appealed, and the 11th Circuit Court upheld the ruling of it being shut down. So the 11th Circuit Court differed with the 5th Circuit Court, right? So that was a circuit split that takes it all the way to the Supreme Court. So now the Supreme Court has to decide whether or not it's constitutional to regulate the conduct of these platforms and prevent viewpoint discrimination on these platforms. So it's getting there. We are going to have some kind of an answer on some of these things soon. It just takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time.
What media platforms can we trust?
Well, our tagline is fake news you can trust. I don't really know the answer to that. I wouldn't point you to any of them. I would say take little bits and pieces from all of them and try to piece together. Use your common sense to the extent that you can to try to sift through everything, because it's really hard to trust what you're being fed. Even a lot of the conservative platforms can still get it wrong because there's so much confirmation bias happening where people want to believe that something is true. And we do this in the worst way sometimes with, even these outrageous stories that they go viral because they're so outrageous. Sometimes, maybe something was cropped off that tweet, or maybe something was taken out of context, and that's what we're latching onto, and that's what we're outraged about. It can happen even on the sites that we do trust, that we think are looking out for us and our values. And so you have to be wary of that.
Does Babylon Bee ever get pushback from pastors? And the person that wrote the question listed a few examples of pastors. I won't go over that.
We've heard from Joel Osteen's people a couple of times. I'll say a name. Was he on the list?
He's on the list.
Okay. They've wanted to fly us out there to sit and meet with him and get to know him. I mean, we've been doing Osteen jokes for so long. We did one about how when Houston flooded after Hurricane Harvey, I'm trying to remember what year this was, maybe 2017 or something, he was riding around in his yacht handing out copies of Your Best Life Now to people in the flooded streets of Houston. We've been making Osteen jokes for a long time, but we push back on some of his theology stuff, we do hear from them from time to time. Most of the time they ignore it, but every now and then they have been very friendly in the way they've reached out. They're inviting us to come and get to know him. They're not saying, "Oh, you better knock it off or we'll sue you." We haven't been threatened with that yet, from a pastor anyway.
Have you gotten backlash from conservative Christians?
Here and there, yeah. Yeah, and usually for like what we were talking about before, mockery is mean. Mockery is mean. Don't make fun of people. Don't make jokes that engage in ridicule and scorn. Be uplifting and encouraging and kind and loving. And I think I agree with them that we need to be those things. But like I said before, with that quote with Lewis about how good philosophy must exist if for no other reason because bad philosophy needs to be answered. That's why satire is necessary, is to take care of those bad ideas. Because if you love somebody, you don't let them buy into nonsense, especially if it's going to do irreversible damage to their bodies and minds, especially if it's impacting young people. Yeah. So. Yeah. You love them by telling the truth, and humor is such an effective vehicle for truth delivery. So I just disagree with them that what we're doing isn't loving. I think that it's not loving to let this stuff go and to not confront it.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the battle we're in right now is so serious and the days are so dark that it goes back to something we were chatting about back in my office. I think we need to be ready not to compromise what we believe, but to have allies with people that we may not have 100% agreement with.
Yeah.
Because I think shooting ourselves, when the question about do you get backlash from conservative Christians, I really hope you don't, because we need to be grateful for every ally we have in this incredible battle that we're in right now.
Yeah. Well, we can't control how people respond to a joke that rubs them the wrong way, you know, and that's one of the challenges. I find it very difficult. I made the mistake early on with this as the Bee was becoming more popular of becoming friends with some of these people that we need to make fun of, politicians and you know, social commentators and influencers or whoever. And once you have a friendship with them, once they're in your phone and you can text them, you will get texts from them when you've made a joke about them. And they want you to take it back or apologize for it, or what were you really trying to say? And I now tell people, I have a disclaimer when I meet some of these people now. I'm like, look, I might have to make fun of you at some point. So we can be friends if you understand that my being your friend doesn't mean that we're gonna be hands off and we're not gonna make a joke at your expense, because we might have to. You might do something stupid. So, yeah, I try to get that out of the way up front, but you know, people will obviously always be offended by jokes that are at their expense.
What or who is the most persistent force in trying to cancel or censor the Babylon Bee?
Let's see. I wouldn't pinpoint it on any one thing. There are a lot of people, there are some specific activists online who have it out for us, who are just constantly trying to report things that we say. There were some people like at Twitter, for example, who are no longer there. Our tweet is still there, but they're no longer there. They did not want us to last on that platform. So there were some individuals that I know of that had it out for us. But I don't know. I'm not sure who is the most steadfastly. I think I speak more broadly about just anyone who has this worldview and they want to insulate this worldview from criticism, and they have cultural and institutional power. They're all in ideological lockstep, and they are all working together to try to put down any criticism, whether it's reason and refutation or ridicule.
Did Elon Musk get a lot of pushback when he put you back on the platform?
Yeah, it was weird how he did it. He got pushback from day one. So I got the coolest message ever. One of the favorite messages I've ever received was the morning Elon took over as CEO. He sent me a text at 4 a.m. that said, "Do you want the Babylon Bee restored? There will be no censorship of humor." So that was really cool. But then it was a month before we got back on, because he walked into Twitter with a sink in his hands, let that sink in, and they immediately were telling him, look, you can't just arbitrarily. The Washington Post reported that he issued an urgent directive on day one, bring back the Babylon Bee. and so he walks in and says that, and then the head of trust and safety, Yoel Roth, said, no, you can't just arbitrarily unban them if they violated a policy. You need to unban everyone who violated that policy or change the policy. And so you have to do these things in a way that's methodical, that makes sense, that's fair to everyone. You can't just and he's like, well, what if you just treat it like a presidential pardon? It's a one-off, you know? And they're like, we don't recommend you do that. So he went back and forth with them about restoring us internally, and they fought him for like a month. And then finally he was like, nope, I'm bringing back Jordan Peterson, the Babylon Bee, and Kathy Griffin. And so those three, all on the same day, were unbanned. And he did ultimately make that decision. So there were a lot of people who were like, look, this is the end. This is the beginning of the end for Twitter. Hate speech will now proliferate because the Babylon Bee is here making jokes that we don't like. So the media was pretty worked up about it.
What's the strangest story the Bee has done that has actually come true?
I mean, some of them are so stupid. We told a joke about how Black Lives Matter as a movement had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And then they did actually get nominated. for the Nobel Peace Prize. So, I mean, you say you can't make this stuff up, but you can, and then we did, some of them are so ridiculous. We did a joke about how unattractive people were more, most people who are still wearing masks are just unattractive or something like that. Maybe that one's a little mean. I always have to look around the room and just see if there's anyone wearing a mask after I say that one. But then a study came out a couple of months later, maybe it was a year later, a study came out that said unattractive individuals were more likely to be still wearing masks than more attractive individuals. And so, you know, we thought it was just a stupid joke, but apparently there's a study to back it up. I could go on. We had a whole spreadsheet of these things, so.
Are there any ways you've received retribution from the government or corporations that you can share about?
Government not that I know of. I think we were mentioned in the Twitter files a couple of times. There were some concerns about jokes that were misinformative. So there have been things that we know of that have been flagged. And, you know, it's crazy to have like the FBI or whatever, you know, or the DOJ looking into your humor to see if your humor is harmful. It comes from a lot of different angles, though. You have like, you know, what was the other one? Not government, but what? The tech companies themselves?
Retribution or corporations.
Or corporations. Yeah, I mean, we've been removed from various platforms. We've had like Linktree take down our page, or you know, Slack give us problems. MailChimp suspended our account for sharing harmful misinformation. So a lot of private companies, one of our email applications, there's like a shared inbox thing that allows multiple businesses to pull emails into one inbox for a customer service team to share. It's called Front. They suspended us permanently. So we've had a lot of permanent suspensions from, you know, and this is why we had to fight back. So the New York Times wrote a piece on us calling us a far-right misinformation site that traffics in misinformation under the guise of satire. Those are their words. And when they write stuff like that, people trust the New York Times for some reason. Can you believe that? People trust the New York Times. I personally love it when they attack us. I would much rather have them attacking us than praising us. I'd be concerned if they thought we were great. But when they say things like that, it results in, you know, it ends up on our Wikipedia page, and then the next place, when Newsweek does a piece about us, they cite the New York Times piece, which says that we're harmful misinformation. So they repeat that, and they claim that we're harmful misinformation. Next thing you know, you've got this narrative that's solidified with all these reliable sources. And a platform like MailChimp will look at you and say, look, reliable sources say you're harmful misinformation. Why should we host you? And so it has very detrimental effects on your business, and that stuff can snowball really fast. And so we have at every step of the way have been getting out ahead of that. And when the New York Times published that about us, we threatened to sue them for defamation, and they retracted it. So you have to fight back. You have to fight back aggressively, or they will destroy your business purposefully.
How did Babylon Bee get its name?
When Adam started the site, he was trying to think of a way of describing a Christian satire site, because his tagline that we launched with was your trusted source for Christian news satire. He was trying to think, well, how do we think of Christians in today's culture? And he was thinking of Christians really as being kind of like, almost like we're in exile now, like we're on the margins, you know? And so, hailing back to the Hebrew people being in exile in Babylon, he was thinking, well, what if I call it the Babylon Bee, and these are dispatches from exile? So.
Wow.
And it sounds good too.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
That'll preach.
Yeah.
Right. What does your team's writing process look like? Are there topics or people off limits? 2 questions.
Very good questions. The writing process is very collaborative. We chat back and forth. The joke is in the headline. You got to nail the joke in the headline. And so we pitch headlines back and forth based on what's happening in the world, based on stories that everybody knows about, so that people will get the joke. And so we look at what's going on in the world. We pitch jokes back and forth, and we have a team of writers in there. And the ones that are really good, kind of, you know, they get a lot of thumbs ups and likes. And so we can kind of pick and choose which ones the writers think are funny, and then ultimately our editor-in-chief will have, a say over what we publish most times. There are sensitive topics where we want to make sure that the joke isn't going to be misunderstood. So race is a great issue. Whenever you're joking about something related to race, if people don't understand the context or they don't understand what you're trying to say with the joke, they can take it the wrong way and they can think you're just being racist and not trying to be funny. So we have to be mindful of those things and careful about how we present the joke. And so there's never been a topic where I've said, no, we can't joke about that. I firmly insist that we never censor ourselves and refuse to post something because we think it might get us suspended. Those, I think, are the jokes that are most important to make. And so we have a strong policy on that. But we will discuss whether or not the joke could be misunderstood in some context if it's on a really hot topic. But yeah, that's a great question.
Is there a lot of laughter when the meeting's going on, or is it all serious work?
You'd be surprised how much of a grind it can be trying to come up with funny jokes in an insane world. I'll throw another Chesterton one at you. He said, the world has become too absurd to be satirized. He said that in 1911. And I wonder sometimes, imagine if Chesterton could see 2024. What would he think? What would he have to say? But we do laugh a lot. It is fun. It is fun, and we do enjoy it, and we love getting feedback from people who say, just thank you for keeping me sane and making me laugh, because otherwise I would just cry with what's going on.
Yeah, so true. Did I understand Elon Musk visited your office? Did he come and see you?
We've done 2 interviews with him in person. One was in Austin, and the other was at Twitter headquarters after he restored us. He invited us there, and we handed him an IOU for $44 billion that we scrawled on a napkin. That's as good as cash, sir. That's an IOU. So twice in person. The first time when we interviewed him in Austin, it was just one of our interns had DM'd him and said, hey, we want to interview you, but we're in California. And he's like, what are you doing in California? And our intern was like, well, we like the weather here. And he goes, but it's the most expensive weather in the world. And then he called me, he goes, Seth, I have Elon Musk responding to me. Do you want to talk to him? I'm like, what are you talking to him about? And he goes, right now, the weather. I'm like, stop talking to him about the weather. So I jumped in and I was like, dude, we'll come to Austin. We'll come to you. Just tell us when you're free. He goes, this Sunday I'm free. So that was Friday. So we packed up and flew to Austin right away. And that was the first time we sat down with him. And we talked to him about Jesus. We talked to him about Christianity. We talked to him about faith. And he's interesting because he's not dogmatic. He's not like an avowed atheist or anything like that. He's really open. He hasn't been convinced by any one religion, but he's studied the world's religions, and he likes what Christianity has to say. He likes Jesus' ethic. But like Lewis argued, Jesus doesn't really leave it open to just being a good moral teacher, because what he claimed of himself rules that out. He's lying to you, or he's a lunatic if he's not what he says he is. So you have to deal with that at some point. And so we're going to keep hammering that with Elon Musk.
Yeah. I know that I express the views of this audience, but also probably many in the Pacific Northwest, when we want to say thank you for all you do. Thank you for the source of encouragement, the source of laughter.
Can I offer a quick word of encouragement too? Because we have to wrap up, right?
Yes.
Just to close with something, it just take a minute, but one of the people ask how they can help, what they can do. What can I do to make a difference in the fight against censorship, or the fight to restore sanity and truth and reason and goodness and beauty to this world? And instead of the subscribe to the Babylon Bee pitch, I like to tell them the most effective thing that you can do is be bold truth tellers who refuse to censor yourselves. And you don't need to have a large platform to be effective to that end. And there's an illustration I can give you that I think really nails this point. The social conformity study that was done in the 50s by someone named Ash, it's called the Ash experiments. I don't know if you're familiar with these, but they did this social conformity study where they had everybody, they wanted to determine to what extent people will go along with whatever the crowd says, even if it's obviously not true. And we're social animals. We don't want to be outliers. We cave to that pressure all the time. And so this study was designed to expose that and to see to what extent people will conform. And so what they did was they gave everybody these cards that had the way that it worked was everybody was in on it except the subject of the study. There was one person who was the subject, right? So they gave people cards where there'd be 3 different length lines on the card that would be, A, B, and C. A short line, a medium line, and a long line. And then you'd have a reference card in the other hand that matched one of those lines. And it was pretty obvious which one it matched. And what they would do is they would have everybody give the wrong answer about which line matched. And it would get around to the subject of the study, and they'd be thinking, am I crazy? Everybody thinks it's B. It's so clearly A. And sometimes they would say what it really was, but a lot of the time, in fact, in some cases, up to 75% of the time, they would give the wrong answer just because everybody else did. And they probably questioned their own sanity, by the way. When everyone in the room is saying 2 and 2 makes 5, you might start to think, maybe it does. Maybe I'm the crazy one. How could everybody else be wrong? Guess what? Everybody else can be wrong. And so what they did in this study was they introduced a new variable where they had somebody at the table give the right answer, just to see how that would change things. So it was wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, right answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer. The conformity rate when it got around to the subject of the study, when one person was willing to give the true answer, dropped to under 5%. So it went from almost everybody conforming to almost nobody conforming just because one person was willing to say what was true. And so I think that the point of that illustration is that you don't have to have a large following, you don't have to be famous, you don't have to be wealthy, you just have to be the person in the room who's willing to say what's true, and you just might give someone else permission and embolden them to do it too. So.
Yeah. Thank you for being here tonight. You encourage us all by your presence. Please help us spread the word about Apologia. Our heart is that we as one local congregation can maybe be of service to the Christian community of the Pacific Northwest by offering these nights where we can have a little bit of sanity in the midst of the craziness of our world. And the hope we have is, I believe, the hope we have in the midst of all the darkness is that there's going to come a day when the Church of Jesus in the Pacific Northwest and the nation is going to wake up, fall in love with Jesus all over again, and then we'll be salt and light in this world. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for being here tonight.